To work a provisional crochet cast on, you're going to need some scrap yarn in a color that is a contrast color to the yarn for your project. I prefer to use a fiber that won't felt, so this is some linen scrap. You can also use cotton or maybe a superwash merino in a pinch. So you're gonna need your scrap yarn. You're gonna need the needles specified by your pattern or whatever needles you've determined will help you achieve gauge. And you're going to need a crochet hook. The size of the crochet hook doesn't matter too much because the size of your cast on is going to be determined by your knitting needles, but to the extent that you are able, finding a crochet hook that is similar in size to your needles is probably good. Okay, so when I work a provisional crochet cast on, the first thing that I do is I tie a knot in the end of my scrap yarn. And the reason that I do this is because when I go back to unzip the cast on, I'm going to want to pull from the other end, the end where I ended the cast on. And so tying the knot at the beginning helps me identify that that's not where I want to pull from when I unzip the cast on. So once I have that knot, I'm going to create a slip knot. Just like this. And I'm going to put that slip knot onto my crochet hook, like this. Okay. And now I'm going to chain maybe 3 or 4 chains. The goal here is to just create a solid foundation for my cast on. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, the way that a provisional crochet cast on works is that you're going to keep making this chain, but you're going to add the needle in and loop these little stitches around the needle as you go. So the way to do this is to start with your hook and your needle parallel and your working yarn behind the needle. And then you're going to pull the working yarn across over the front of the needle and grab it with the crochet hook and pull it through the loop. Oop. Just like that. And then you're going to take your working yarn, put it between the tip of the needle and the crochet hook, and repeat that same process. Pull the yarn through the loop. Move the yarn to the back, pull it over the knitting needle through the loop with the crochet hook. Move the yarn to the back between the tip of the needle and the crochet hook, and then pull the yarn through again. And so on until you've cast on the number of stitches specified by the pattern. So let's say this pattern tells us to cast on 6 stitches. Oops, I got a little split in my yarn there. 6 stitches. I have 6 stitches cast on here. The way that I'm going to end my provisional cast on is the same way that I started. I'm going to just chain 3 or 4 more little stitches. And on the final one, I'm going to pull the yarn through and snip it. And so this is what my cast on looks like. I have the knot at the end where I started and no knot at the end where I finished. And from here, I would just begin knitting into these stitches as if it was a normal cast on. And that's it. To unzip a provisional cast on, you're going to need a pair of spare knitting needles in a size similar or smaller to the needles that you are working your project in. Now, assuming you have cast on your provisional cast on the way that I recommend, you should have a knot showing you which end is the end where you began and which end is the end where you finished your crochet cast on. You're going to begin working from the end without a knot, so the end that you finished casting on. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is get to the point where the crochet cast on meets the yarn. So remember, you worked these extra chains at the end. We're going to want to pick those out using the tip of our knitting needle. So I'm going to begin by pulling this out. And once you've pulled out this first loop, your chain should unzip really nicely and easily. At this point, if you're pulling and it's not unzipping very nicely, you might want to stop and first make sure that you've pulled the yarn back through the loop that you pulled it through at the end. And if it continues to not pull, it might be that you are pulling from the wrong end of your crochet cast on. Okay, so as I'm pulling, see how nicely those stitches just pop right out? Okay, I'm gonna pause in pulling before I get to my actual work. Now, I like to hold my work in my left hand and then use my right hand to maneuver my knitting needle. I find it easiest to put my stitches on the needle before I pull the provisional cast on off the stitches. So the way that I do this is I grab the yarn here and the loop here from the cast on chain and I pull up, and when I do that, I see that there's a little hole here that yarn is coming out of. And that's the stitch that I want to be putting on this needle. So I'm going to back up and show you what that looks like again. Right, so I'm just at the point where I'm about to pull out my first provisional cast on stitch. I grab both the working yarn and the loop. It's important because if you only grab one, you'll pull the stitch out. I grab both and I pull up enough that I can see that stitch. And I'm going to stick my needle in it like this, from back to front. And now I'm going to pull that loop, and it will pop out like this. And then I'm going to find the loop again, and that yarn again, and pull up, and stick my needle into that stitch again, and pull again. And this is the process. And after you've done the first couple, it will actually become a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to stick my needle in here and continue in this manner, like this, until I have all of these stitches on my spare needles.